when Joyce Palmer thought the worst part of hosting tonight's dinner party would be explaining her husband's absence to 12 investment bankers. She had no idea that her perfectly curated life was about to shatter along with her kitchen cabinet stand. It would happen while she was wearing nothing but La Perla silk and desperation. The antique mahogany door crashed to the Italian marble floor with a sound like gunfire, spilling the contents of her most private drawer across the kitchen in a humiliating cascade of secrets. Birth control pills scattered like confetti beside crumpled divorce papers, while silk lingerie that had never seen her marriage bed fluttered down like surrender flags. Joyce stood frozen in her champagne-colored slip, bare feet surrounded by the evidence of a life coming apart at the seams. 30 minutes. She had 30 minutes before the Morrison Group's senior partners arrived to discuss the merger that would make or break her career. And now her kitchen looked like a crime scene of feminine rebellion. The doorbell chimed with perfect, cruel timing. Joyce's hands trembled as she dropped to her knees, frantically gathering papers that spelled out the end of her marriage in legal terms she'd helped draft. The silk slip rode up her thighs as she scrambled across cold marble, and she caught her reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator hair escaping its careful chignon. Mascara threatening to smudge, looking nothing like the composed executive who commanded boardrooms with surgical precision. The doorbell rang again, more insistent. Emergency repair service, a voice called through the heavy oak door, carrying the kind of warm authority that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with panic. Joyce pressed her back against the kitchen island. Hyperware. That the man on the other side of that door would see everything, her vulnerability, her secrets, her body barely concealed by designer fabric that suddenly felt transparent. She should run upstairs, throw on a robe, pretend to be the put-together wife whose biggest concern was whether the caterers would arrive on time. Instead, she found herself moving toward the door like a woman walking toward either salvation or damnation, her bare feet silent on marble that felt ice-cold against her skin. The scattered evidence of her secret life lay behind her like breadcrumbs leading back to a person she'd been hiding even from herself. When she opened the door, Joyce Palmer discovered that some kinds of repair work had nothing to do with broken cabinets and everything to do with broken women who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by someone like Todd Green's. Joyce had exactly 90 seconds to transform from the woman Todd Green's had just seen sprawled across marble in silk and secrets into the polished hostess 12 investment bankers expected to find. The black cocktail dress she'd laid out for tonight now felt like armor as she zipped it over skin still burning from his gaze, but armor that left her feeling more exposed than the slip ever had. Mrs. Palmer. Todd's voice carried through the kitchen door she'd hastily closed between them. I need to access the cabinet frame to complete the repair. The sound of car doors slamming in the circular drive sent panic shooting through her veins. They were here. The Morrison Group executives who could fast-track her promotion or end her career with a single conversation about her husband's conspicuous absence and her obvious distress. Come in, Joyce called, her voice steadier than her hands as she smoothed the cocktail dress that suddenly felt too tight, too revealing to everything. Todd entered with his tool bag and a professional composure that should have reassured her, but instead made every nerve-ending spark with awareness. He'd changed into a crisp work shirt that emphasized shoulders built for more than just cabinet repair. And when he knelt beside the broken frame, Joyce found herself studying the precise way his hands moved over wood like a pianist finding familiar keys. I'll need you to hold this steady, he said, indicating a cabinet panel that required her to crouch beside him in the narrow space between the island and the broken frame. The first voice echoed from the foyer. Her husband David's practiced laugh as he greeted arriving guests. Joyce's breath caught as she realized he'd returned early from his business trip, and she was trapped in intimate proximity with a man whose presence made her skin feel electric. Easy, Todd murmured as she stumbled, reaching around him for balance, his hands automatically spanning her waist to steady her. The contact lasted 3 seconds longer than necessary, his thumbs brushing against silk that might as well have been nothing at all. "Your guests sound important," he said quietly, their faces inches apart as they worked in the confined space. "Career-defining." Joyce whispered back, hyper-aware that David's voice was growing closer as he guided guests toward the dining room. Her dress caught on Todd's drill bit, and as she knelt to free the fabric, she felt rather than saw his sharp intake of breath. "Joyce." "Darling." David's voice carried from just outside the kitchen. "The Morrisons are asking about dinner." Todd's eyes found hers in the cramped space between cabinets and consequences. And Joyce realized he'd seen the pale band of skin where her wedding ring used to live. Evidence of decisions she'd already made but hadn't yet found the courage to voice. The 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower felt like a glass fortress against the November sky. City lights twinkling below like scattered diamonds as Joyce poured 2 glasses of wine she had no business offering. Todd sat across from her mahogany desk, cabinet sketches spread between them like a roadmap to somewhere neither had planned to go. "Full kitchen renovation," Joyce said, her voice carrying the authority she wielded in boardrooms, though her pulse hammered against her throat like a caged bird. "Custom cabinetry, integrated storage solutions, the works." Todd's dark eyes studied her with the same intensity he'd brought to examining her broken cabinet frame. "This is a significant investment. Mrs. Palmer, your husband on board with the timeline?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Joyce lifted her wineglass, buying time while the truth clawed its way up her chest with desperate urgency. "There is no husband," she said finally, the admission falling into the space between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Not any more of the divorce papers you saw scattered across my kitchen floor. I filed them 3 weeks ago." Todd's hands stilled on his sketchpad. The silence stretched taut with possibility and danger. "I need to tell you something," Joyce continued, emboldened by wine and the intoxicating safety of empty offices and honest darkness. "The cabinet didn't just break. I broke it, deliberately." Her laugh carried a note of hysteria. "I saw your photo on the company website and God, this sounds insane. I've been fantasizing about hands like yours for months. Strong, capable hands that could fix more than just broken things." The confession spilled out of her like blood from a wound she'd been hiding. "I've been touching myself, thinking about a man exactly like you. Someone real, someone who works with his hands, someone who wouldn't look at me like I'm just another trophy wife collecting dust on a shelf." Todd's pencil dropped to the desk with a soft click. "Joyce," the way he said her name, low, rough, like gravel and honey, made her stomach clench with want. "I've thought about you every night since I saw you on that kitchen floor," he admitted, his professional composure cracking like ice under pressure. "About what it would feel like to touch you when you weren't broken, when you were just ... you." He stood, moving around the desk with predatory grace. Joyce rose to meet him, wine forgotten, city lights painting them both in gold and shadow. They moved toward each other like magnets finally allowed to connect. And Joyce realized she was about to discover what happened when fantasy collided with flesh, hand-blood reality. The security guard's key turning in the distant elevator made them both freeze, suspended in the space between desire and consequence. The house felt different, empty of David's presence, larger somehow, as if removing one person had created space for possibility to breathe. Joyce had chosen her outfit with deliberate care. Charcoal yoga pants that hugged every curve, and a fitted white tank top that left little to imagination. If Todd wanted to maintain professional boundaries, she planned to test exactly how strong those boundaries were. "We'll start with the perimeter measurements," Todd said, unrolling his metal tape with practiced efficiency. The morning light streaming, Through bare windows caught the gold in his dark skin. And Joyce found herself studying the precise way his fingers gripped the measuring tool. Of course, Joyce agreed, moving to help hold the tape steady. She positioned herself deliberately close. Close enough that reaching for the far end required pressing her body against his back, her breasts brushing his shoulder blade through. Thin cotton. Todd's hand tightened on the tape measure. "Joyce, the measurement?" she asked innocently, though her pulse hammered against her throat like a desperate thing seeking freedom. His hands found her waist, spanning the narrow space between her hip bones as he moved her aside with careful control. But instead of releasing her immediately, his thumbs traced small circles against the fabric of her tank top, and Joyce felt the touch like electricity shooting straight to her core. "I need to open up this space," Todd said, his voice rougher than professional courtesy required. "Remove the barriers, create better flow." The double meaning hung between them like smoke, thick and intoxicating. They moved to measure the lower cabinets, kneeling together on marble that felt warm now instead of cold. Joyce's pencil rolled away from her notepad suddenly, of course, and she turned to retrieve it, arching her back in a way that made the yoga pants stretch tight across her curves. Todd's sharp intake of breath was audible in the quiet kitchen. "You're testing me," he said quietly, his face inches from hers as they both reached for the same corner measurement. "Am I?" Joyce whispered back, letting her lips part slightly as she met his intense gaze. For a moment, space between them hummed with electricity, so charged it felt dangerous. Todd's hand moved toward her face, and Joyce tilted her chin up, ready to discover what his mouth would taste like, what his hands would feel like, tangled in her hair. Then Todd pulled back abruptly, standing with fluid grace that left Joyce kneeling, alone on cold marble, aching and frustrated and wanting more than she'd ever wanted anything in her carefully controlled life. "We should maintain professional boundaries," he said, but his voice carried the strain of a man barely holding on to his resolve. Joyce remained on the floor, looking up at him with challenge blazing in her eyes, knowing she'd already won this war even if she'd lost this particular battle. The Golden Dragon restaurant smelled like Joyce's childhood soy sauce and star anise. Disappointment and duty served family style. Her parents sat across the red vinyl booth, their faces carved from the same stone that had weathered decades of building the American dream, one order of sweet and sour pork at a time. "David is a good man," her mother said in Mandarin, the language reserved for serious conversations and serious shame. "You fix marriage, not throw away like garbage." Joyce's father nodded gravely, his weathered hands folded on the table like a judgment already rendered. "Divorce brings dishonor. People talk. Business suffers." The familiar weight of expectations pressed down on Joyce's shoulders like a yoke she'd worn for 32 years. She thought of Todd's hands on her waist that morning, the way his touch had awakened something in her that 15 years of marriage had never even stirred. Her phone buzzed against her thigh. Todd's name lit up the screen like salvation. "I need air," Joyce said, standing abruptly from the booth. Her parents' disapproving murmurs followed her through the restaurant and into the parking lot, where November wind cut through her silk blouse like a knife. "Hello," she answered, her voice already breathless before he'd said a word. "I can't stop thinking about this morning." Todd's voice was rough velvet in her ear. "About the way you looked kneeling on that kitchen floor, testing my control." Joyce slid into her BMW, grateful for tinted windows and the privacy they afforded. "What would you have done if I'd tested it further?" "I would have kissed you until you forgot your own name," he said, and Joyce felt heat bloom between her thighs at the raw honesty in his voice. "Then I would have laid you down on that marble floor and shown you what your body was made for." Hand found its way beneath her skirt without conscious thought, fingers trembling as they traced the silk barrier between her and the ache that had been building all morning. "Tell me," she whispered, her breath fogging the windows as her parents' silhouettes moved inside the restaurant, probably discussing her shameful behavior. While she discovered what desire actually felt like, Todd's voice guided her with explicit promises and careful instructions, painting pictures with words that made her arch against leather seats while her parents debated honor and duty mere yards away. When release finally claimed her, Joyce bit her lip to keep from crying out his name into the parking lot air. Never, double quotes, she gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. In 15 years of marriage, I never felt anything like this. Joyce, Todd said, her name like a prayer on his lips. What are we doing? The question hung between them, heavy with consequence and possibility. While through the restaurant window, her parents' disappointed faces promised that choosing passion would cost her everything she'd been raised to value. The workshop smelled like cedar and possibility when Joyce pushed through the heavy door at 9:30. Her trench coat belted tight against November rain and the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Todd looked up from the dining table he was sanding, his work shirt rolled to the elbows, sawdust caught in his dark hair like golden snow. Joyce. Her name carried surprise and something deeper, darker. What are you doing here? Instead of answering, she untied the belt of her coat and let Burberry wool fall to the concrete floor. Underneath, black lace traced the curves of her body like cartographers' lines mapping uncharted territoria. Bodysuit that left nothing to imagination and everything to desire. Todd's sander clattered to the workbench. Jesus. My parents think I should honor my marriage vows, Joyce said, moving toward him with predatory grace. Choose duty over desire. Stay in my cage like a good little wife. She stopped close enough to feel the heat radiating from his chest. But I've tasted freedom now, Todd. I've felt what it's like to want someone who wants me back. His hands found her waist like they belonged there, thumbs tracing the delicate lace that barely contained her. Joyce, if we do this, we've already done this, she whispered, rising on her toes to brush her lips against his jaw. In your mind, in mine. I'm tired of living in fantasy. The last thread of his control snapped audibly. Todd lifted her on too. The dining table he'd been crafting, scattering tools and wood shavings as his mouth claimed hers with desperate hunger. The taste of him coffee and mint and raw masculine need made her arch. Against solid wood that still smelled of forest and growing things, his hands mapped her body like he was learning a new language. One written in sighs and gasps and the way she trembled when he touched her through black lace. When he finally stripped the bodysuit away, Joyce discovered what her body was truly capable of, what 15 years of marriage had never taught her about pleasure and surrender and the intoxicating power of being truly wanted. The workshop became their sanctuary. Sawdust and silk, creating an atmosphere that made every touch feel sacred. Todd showed her how the same hands that could coax beauty from rough wood could worship her body until she forgot her own name, until she understood why people wrote poetry about desire. Later, as they lay tangled together on the table he'd built, Todd reached for something hidden beneath canvas in the corner. A jewelry box, hand-carved with intricate detail, her initials etched into mahogany like a promise. I've been working on this since the night I met you, he said quietly. This isn't just about wanting you, Joyce. This is about loving you. The confession hit her like lightning, illuminating everything they'd built and everything they still had to lose. The dinner party glittered with a kind of restrained elegance that impressed investment bankers' crystal stemware, catching candlelight. Conversation flowing like expensive wine between courses. Joyce moved through her dining room with practiced grace, serving her colleagues while Todd installed the final cabinet hardware just steps away in the kitchen. Their proximity a delicious torture that made every nerve ending sing with awareness. The Morrison merger looks promising, Richard Sterling was saying as Joyce refilled his wine glass. But all she could think about was the way. Todd's eyes had darkened when she'd whispered that she wasn't wearing anything beneath her black silk. Dress stopped between the salad and main course, Joyce slipped into the pantry under the pretense of retrieving more wine. Todd followed seconds later, pressing her against oak shelving with desperate hunger. His mouth claiming hers while her colleagues laughed at someone's joke mere feet away. "You're going to get us caught," he whispered against her throat. But his hands were already sliding up her thighs, discovering the truth of her confession. "I don't care," Joyce gasped, her fingers tangling in his hair as pleasure shot through her like lightning. The risk of discovery only intensified every sensation, made every touch feel electric and dangerous and more alive than anything she'd ever experienced. The sound of a car, door slamming outside, made them both freeze. Joyce's blood turned to ice as she recognized the engine of David's BMW. He wasn't supposed to return until tomorrow. Wasn't supposed to witness the dinner party that had become foreplay, the careful facade she'd built around her new life. "Stay here," she hissed to Todd, smoothing her dress with trembling hands before emerging from the pantry with wine bottles clutched like shields. David appeared in the kitchen doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from travel, his eyes taking in Todd's presence with calculating coldness that made Joyce's stomach clench with dread. "Darling," David said, his voice carrying the kind of controlled fury that preceded explosions. "Introduce me to your ... contractor." The dinner party continued in the dining room, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the kitchen. Joyce watched her husband shake Todd's hand with predatory politeness. Saw the moment when David's gaze fell on the scattered tools, the intimate way she and Todd stood too close together, the flush on her face that spoke of more than hostess duties. "We need to talk," David said quietly, his hand finding Joyce's elbow with possessive pressure. "Privately." As he guided her toward his study, David leaned close enough that only she could hear his next words. "I know about the workshop, Joyce. I know about everything. End this affair now, or I'll destroy both your careers and make sure Todd never works in this city again." The ultimatum hit her like a physical blow, but even as fear crawled up her throat, Joyce realized she'd already made her choice. The moment she'd let her trench coat fall to Todd's workshop floor, the photographs scattered across Attorney Margaret Wu's mahogany desk-like accusations made flesh Joyce and Todd in his workshop. Their bodies intertwined on handcrafted wood, passion captured in high-definition betrayal. David sat across from Joyce with the satisfaction of a hunter displaying his kill, while the private investigator he'd hired shuffled through additional evidence with professional detachment. "Adultery changes everything," David said, his voice carrying the cold precision of a blade finding its mark. "The prenup becomes void. You lose the house, the investment accounts, your reputation with every client who values family stability." He leaned forward like a shark scenting blood. "End this affair now, and I might be persuaded to forget what I've seen." Joyce stared at the images of herself, discovering what desire actually felt like, what it meant to be wanted rather than simply possessed. Her hands trembled as she recognized the jewelry box Todd had carved for her, visible in the background of one particularly intimate photograph. "I need time to consider," she managed, her voice steady, despite the earthquake happening inside her chest. An hour later, she sat on the edge of a hotel bed, while Todd paced the small room like a caged animal, rage and helplessness radiating from him in waves that made the air feel electric. "I won't let him destroy you," Todd said, kneeling before her and taking her face in his hands. "Whatever it costs, whatever I have to do." Joyce silenced him with a kiss that tasted like desperation and defiance, pouring 15 years of suppressed passion into the contact. If this was their last night together, she wanted to remember what it felt like to be truly alive. They made love with the intensity of people facing execution. every touch magnified by the knowledge that tomorrow might steal everything they'd found. Todd worshipped her body with desperate reverence, promising to make her forget everything except the way he could make her feel. And Joyce abandoned every inhibition she'd ever possessed. When the private investigator called at midnight, Joyce expected more threats, more evidence of her shame. Instead, she heard something in his voice that made her pulse quicken with different possibilities. "Mrs. Palmer, there's something else you need to know about your husband's finances. The offshore accounts, the client fund transfers. I think you should see these bank records before you make any decisions about your marriage." As Joyce studied the evidence of David's embezzlement, watching years of his criminal activity unfold in neat columns of stolen money, she realized the balance of power had just shifted dramatically. David had been so focused on capturing her adultery that he'd forgotten she was an investment banker who knew exactly what financial fraud looked like. The hunter had just become the hunted. And Joyce held all the ammunition. The custom wooden pendant rested against Joyce's throat like a secret talisman. Todd's initials carved so subtly into the mahogany that only she could feel them. When she touched the smooth surface during board meetings. 3 weeks since David's threats had backfired spectacularly, and Joyce discovered that sexual confidence translated into professional power in ways she'd never imagined. "The Henderson portfolio shows a 23% increase," she told. The Morrison Group executives, her voice carrying an authority that made seasoned bankers lean forward with newfound respect. The jewelry box Todd had crafted sat on her desk like a declaration of war against everything her old life had represented. Margaret Wu had been right. David's embezzlement charges made him radioactive in financial circles, while Joyce emerged as the principled wife who'd exposed corruption at personal cost. The narrative transformation felt surreal, but the professional opportunities were devastatingly real. Her assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ms. Palmer, Mr. Greens is here for your 3 o'clock. Joyce's pulse quickened as Todd entered her corner office, tool bag replaced by a leather portfolio that contained architectural drawings for the luxury furniture line they were launching together. He moved with the same confident grace that had first caught her attention. But now that confidence extended beyond workshop walls into boardrooms and client presentations. 5 minutes until the Blackstone meeting," he said, closing the door behind him with deliberate intent. "That's not enough time," for Joyce began, but Todd was already moving around her desk, his hands finding her waist as he lifted her onto the mahogany surface she'd commanded for 8 years. "Trust me," he whispered against her throat, his fingers finding the hem of her pencil skirt with practiced efficiency. When she walked into the Blackstone presentation 6 minutes later, Joyce carried herself with the kind of sensual confidence that made power brokers forget she was technically the divorced scandal of the quarter. The post-orgasmic glow that had seemed like weakness in her marriage became her greatest professional weapon. The visible evidence of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it. The hotel suite overlooking Central Park felt like a victory celebration as Joyce and Todd reviewed the signed contracts that would make them both wealthy beyond her previous banker's salary. The Blackstone Group wanted to invest in their Paris eyes, their partnership professional and personal, seeing the undeniable chemistry that made their business presentations feel like seduction. The Hendersons called, Todd said, his hands working massage oil into her shoulders as champagne bubbles caught the city lights. "They want relationship advice. Apparently, we're the couple that convinced them good sex can save a marriage." Joyce laughed, realizing they'd accidentally become relationship consultants to Manhattan's elite. "What have we created?" "Something better than either of us imagined," Todd murmured. And Joyce knew he wasn't talking about their business portfolio. The Greens family dinner table overflowed with the kind of chaotic love Joyce had only witnessed in movies: children arguing over cornbread, adults talking over each other with passionate conviction. Laughter so genuine it made her chest ache with recognition of everything she'd been missing. Todd's mother, Evelyn, had claimed Joyce like a long-lost daughter the moment they'd walked through the door, while his sister Maya studied her with the protective intensity of someone deciding whether to grant approval. "So you're the woman who's got my brother walking around with that ridiculous smile," Maya said, passing Joyce homemade mac and cheese that smelled like comfort itself. About time someone knocked him off his high horse. Joyce felt heat creep up her neck as Todd's hand found her thigh under the table, his thumb tracing small circles against her silk dress. The family's easy acceptance of their obvious chemistry was intoxicating. No one here questioned whether their attraction was appropriate or sustainable. They simply celebrated it. "Excuse me," Joyce murmured, needing a moment to process the overwhelming warmth of unconditional acceptance. Todd followed her down the hallway to the small bathroom, pressing her against the door the moment it closed behind them. "Too much?" he asked, his hands framing her face with gentle concern. "Not too much," Joyce whispered, pulling him closer. "Just different. Good, different." He kissed her with the kind of reverent passion that made her forget about David's criminal charges, about the evidence she held that could destroy her old life completely. His hands worked their magic until she was gasping his name against his shoulder, stress dissolving under skilled fingers that knew exactly how to make her forget everything except this moment. When they returned to the dining room, Joyce's phone was buzzing with messages from her sister, Anna. The texts grew increasingly urgent as Joyce scrolled through them, her stomach clenching as she read the truth she'd been avoiding. "Mom and Dad don't hate Todd," Anna had written. "They're terrified of what the community will say, but they see how happy you are. They're just too proud to admit they were wrong about everything." The revelation hit Joyce like a physical blow. Her parents' rejection hadn't been about Todd's character or their cultural differences. It had been about fear and pride and the weight of expectations that had shaped 3 generations of their family. Evelyn Greens appeared at her elbow, maternal instincts finely tuned to distress. "Everything all right, baby?" Looking around the table at faces that had welcomed her without condition, Joyce realized she'd found something she'd been searching for her entire life without knowing it. This was what family actually felt like: messy, accepting, real. "Everything's perfect," Joyce said, and for the first time in her life, she meant it completely. David's law office felt like a tomb when Joyce walked through the mahogany doors. Bank records and federal wire transfer documentation arranged in her briefcase like ammunition for a war she'd already won. Her ex-husband sat behind his enormous desk looking smaller than she remembered, while his business partners shifted nervously in Italian leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Gentlemen," Joyce said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd discovered that surviving attempted destruction made her invincible. "I'm here to discuss my husband's embezzlement of client funds and how we're going to handle the transition of his business relationships." David's face went white as she spread the evidence. Across his desk, years of financial fraud documented with the precision only a former investment banker could achieve. But Joyce wasn't here for revenge. She was here for recruitment. "I'm launching a luxury furniture company with master craftsman Todd Greens," she continued, watching David's partners realize their meal ticket was about to expire. "Your clients who value discretion and quality will find our services compatible with their needs." 3 hours later, Joyce stood in the Meridian Gallery watching Manhattan's elite circle Todd's handcrafted pieces like sharks scenting blood. The dining table where they'd first made love had been transformed into the centerpiece of his debut collection, polished mahogany that gleamed under gallery lighting while carrying the secret knowledge of everything they discovered together. The curves are inspired by classical architecture, Todd was explaining to a collector whose wife couldn't stop touching the smooth wood surface. Each piece is designed to enhance intimate spaces, Create environments where people can be authentically themselves. Joyce felt heat bloom between her thighs as she watched him work the room with professional confidence that made her want to claim him publicly. When their eyes met across the gallery, the chemistry between them was so visible that other couples began gravitating toward them, sensing the kind of partnership that transcended simple business collaboration. "You two are magnetic," Mrs. Henderson murmured. Her husband nodding agreement as they commissioned a custom bedroom suite. "Whatever you're doing, it's working." The penthouse felt like a sanctuary when they finally escaped the gallery's champagne-soaked success. Joyce's dress hit the floor before Todd finished locking the door, and they celebrated their triumph with the kind of passionate intensity that had started this entire transformation. "We did it," Joyce gasped against his mouth as he lifted her onto the kitchen island where everything had begun. "We actually did it." But even as Todd worshipped her body with reverent hunger, Joyce realized their victory was bigger than professional success or financial security. They'd proven that authentic love could create authentic power, that choosing passion over safety sometimes led to having both. The beach house rose from California sand like something Todd had dreamed into existence, every beam hand-selected, every joint crafted with the precision of a man building forever. Joyce stood on the deck, overlooking waves that caught moonlight like scattered diamonds. Her wedding dress pooled around her feet, while her new husband finished installing the custom headboard he'd carved as her wedding gift. "Come see," Todd called from the bedroom, his voice carrying the rough edge that never failed to make her pulse race. The bed dominated the space, like an altar to everything they'd built together, mahogany posts that spiraled toward the ceiling, their initials intertwined in wood grain that would outlast lifetimes. When Todd lifted her onto silk sheets that smelled like ocean air and possibility, Joyce discovered that making love as his wife felt like coming home to herself. "Mrs. Greens," he whispered against her throat, and Joyce felt the name settle into her bones like truth finally spoken aloud. Their passion burned brighter for the obstacles they'd overcome, each touch carrying the weight of battles fought and won. When release finally claimed them both, Joyce understood why people built empires for lovesome things were worth any price. 6 months later, their Manhattan showroom buzzed with a controlled chaos of success beyond their wildest projections. Joyce's parents stood near the custom dining set Todd had built for their anniversary, her mother's fingers tracing wood grain with the reverence of someone finally understanding what her daughter had chosen. "He's gifted," her father admitted, quietly watching Todd explain joinery techniques to a celebrity client whose commission would fund their next expansion. "And he makes you happy in ways we never taught you to expect." The acknowledgement felt like absolution and acceptance rolled into one imperfect package. David appeared in the showroom doorway, his prison pallor and probation officer flanking him, like uncomfortable reminders of consequences. 2 years had transformed Joyce's ex-husband from entitled predator into something resembling humble gratitude. "The Henderson order is ready for delivery," he said, offering Joyce the invoice with hands that no longer carried arrogance as accessories. Prison had taught him respect for both Todd's character and their partnership success. "Thank you, David," Joyce replied, meaning it. Even broken things could find purpose when properly rebuilt. As evenings settled over their empire of wood and stone and satisfied clients, Joyce and Todd stood together in the workshop where everything had begun. The scent of sawdust and sex still lingered in corners like expensive perfume, while new projects waited like promises of continued growth. 5 years, Todd mused, his arms circling her waist as she leaned back against his chest. "And I still can't keep my hands off you." Joyce smiled, feeling his desire press against her back, knowing they'd proven that authentic passion could build authentic power. Some love stories ended with happily ever after. Theirs was just getting started.